Hey everyone, it's Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's Monday, and we now know the first Steelers coach who is moving on from the staff from this past season. So, who do the Steelers get to replace him? I give you three candidates that I think the Steelers need to take a serious look at if they want to show that they're serious about improving their coaching staff under Mike Tomlin. We'll talk about that, answer a mailbag question, and get into our final grades, starting with the defensive linemen, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. All right, everyone, hope you had a good weekend. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, getting you ready. But we do finally know at least one change in the Steelers coaching staff, and we're going to talk about that, but not just about the person who's moving on, but what the Steelers need to do to replace them. Now, if you don't know, Aaron Curry, Steelers linebackers coach over the past 2 seasons, he is now no longer with the staff. He has moved on. He is going to be the linebackers coach for the New York Jets. So we know he's moved on. The Steelers have not officially announced his replacement. And with that, I think there's a few thoughts here. One, I don't think that Aaron Curry really was was one of the coaching problems. Now, maybe he wasn't one of the coaching solutions to making things a whole lot better, but under his watch, you saw last year when they brought in Cole Holcomb, Quan Alexander, and Landon Roberts to try to fix the linebacker situation. 2/3 of those guys went down, and even Landon Roberts suffered an injury that kind of made him kind of linger throughout the rest of the season, and they had to work with practice squad guys, and they kind of held it together for a little bit as long as they could. And then this year, they went and got Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson. Peyton Wilson improved throughout the year, and honestly, I think the linebacker unit had been as good as it's been since you've really seen Ryan Shazier leading the unit. So ultimately, I can't say Aaron Curry did a bad job for the Steelers. So I kind of see people that are kind of like, hey, this doesn't make sense. The only way that this would make sense is if the Steelers take a serious step forward in trying to acquire a more senior type of defensive coach to fill the linebacker role, who could maybe someday even become their defensive coordinator. Now, a few things about that. Now, I know there's some people, if you know the Steelers coaching staff, you know that some of the younger coaches that are not in official, announced roles on the team's website, former Steelers linebackers themselves, Ryan Shazier, Vince Williams, they help out with the team. Now, here's the thing. I think it'd be great that if these guys were able to build their legacy more with the team. It'd be an amazing story for Ryan Shazier to do this. And I talk about this a bit with Ray Fittipaldo as well on the North Shore Drive podcast. But the Steelers right now need other coaches on this staff. If Art Rooney, as he says, is not going to expand the staff dramatically, as we've been saying that it might be smart if he did, he needs to be hiring coaches that can take on more than just their position roles, coaches that can be sort of extra help to the coordinators, run game to coordinators, at different sides of the ball and helping things out. And this is I have 3 coaching candidates that I think the Steelers should take a serious look at, who are free agents as of me recording this late Sunday night into Monday morning. That the Steelers need to be taking a serious look at if they want to improve their coaching staff. And what's the big thing I've been saying that Teryl Austin needs if they're not going to get rid of him? Now, I've said I thought it'd be fine if they moved on from Teryl Austin. Obviously, they're not doing that because he was at the Senior Bowl looking at players. He's got another year on his contract, so they're keeping him around. So if you're replacing the linebackers coach, you need someone that's going to balance the things that Teryl Austin wasn't able to do. And what are the things that we talked about this year? We talked about how the blitz rate for the Steelers decreased under Teryl Austin. I'm pulling up the chart for those on YouTube, but if you go back to the past 3 years under Teryl Austin, 24 through 2022, they've ranked 20. They've ranked 12th, 6th, and 6th in blitzing teams. And in the years before that, their percentages were way up. They ranked 13th, 3rd, and 7th. They've been able to bring more heat with Keith Butler. He was a bigger part of what he was trying to do, was trying to pressure the quarterback and send heat from different looks, including in 2020 when they rushed the quarterback 40% of the time. 2019, they rushed the quarterback 36.9% of the time. Those two are higher than any of the rates that were registered under Teryl Austin. And we also talked all season about how TJ Watt wasn't being moved around enough and how they needed to switch things up and complicate things so that the offenses it would be harder for them to key off on him and plan on how to isolate him from plays. And that was something that just never happened. And as we know, Teryl Austin, his specialty is the secondary. He's good at coming up with disguised coverages and putting things on the back end and making things a little bit more complex back there. But it's obvious that there needs to be some help on the senior level of trying to get things done. And that's where I think the Steelers could really take a step up with their with how they're handling this coaching search. And if they want to get guys, there's three guys in my mind that fit this role that you're looking for. One, and all of them recently let go coaches from bigger positions. One, Antonio Pierce, former head coach of the Raiders. Two, Jerod Mayo, former head coach of the Patriots. And three, Gus Bradley, recently fired Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator, also with head coaching experience. He was a head coach for the Jaguars from 2013 to 2016. But what do these guys all have in common? They're former linebackers, coaches who have worked their ways up the systems, have proven themselves at those positions that people wanted to give them bigger chances, and it didn't work out in those bigger chances. And now they're looking for jobs, and they can come in and sort of reclaim the role that got them to advance in their careers and bring in senior experience of they've been the leaders of rooms. They know what it's like to be in that position. Now they can be in a position where they can support a defensive coordinator while also giving more insight and saying, hey, this is the part that you're weaker in. This is the part that you're less experienced in. This is where I can help more in coming up with more blitz schemes, more fits, help coordinate the run defense a little bit better, maybe mix up where TJ Watt lines up, those types of things. That's where I think that these guys could come into play and give the Steelers a better look here. And again, what you're looking at here is it's the type of coaches. Now, some people might be saying, well, Chris, these guys just got fired from jobs. Why do you want them? Most coordinators or most position coaches that you're getting, they're coming from being let go from something. And so you often want to get guys who aren't necessarily moving horizontally, but maybe taking a step back because they tried to jump up and try to do a little too much. And not all coaches are meant to be head coaches. Some guys are meant to be great position coaches. Take, for example, maybe one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time, Dick LeBeau, who was the guy around Mike Tomlin for quite some time and a guy that came around and really, really tuned up Bill Cowher's defense. But Dick LeBeau, before he became a head coach for the Bengals, he was a great defensive coordinator. People recognize that about him. Then he went and became a head coach. Wasn't a good head coach. Wasn't a great or a good head coach. Was actually a bad head coach. Was just not his fit. Went back to be a defensive coordinator, and bam, he was one of the greatest that ever lived. Created systems, created blitz looks that were just very unique. That's what the Steelers I think need is a person who they can add to their linebacker coaching room and say like, hey, you've been in that situation. Maybe it didn't work out in the higher up spot that you were, but maybe if you take a step back and you take this part of the team, specifically the linebackers, and don't just coach the linebackers to just try to make them tackle sharper, make them have their pursuit ankles better, and do those things, but also be a senior defensive assistant the way Brian Flores was when he came to the Steelers. Have a little bit of oversight power in helping and how they fit their gaps against the run, how they attack when they want to set up different blitz looks, how the linemen play off the line, how the linebackers play off the linemen in the run look or the pass rush looks. Those types of things I think could bring new eyes and guys that have the kind of leadership experience that can step to and you give them the sort of power in the coaching room. Like, hey, when Teryl Austin, he's the one that's going to call the plays. He's the one that's going to be the coordinator because that's the role that they've given him. But your job is going to be this bigger role within the defense, and he's going to have to adhere to you when it comes to setting up the front of the defense and putting things together. And who knows if one of these guys work out, like say, Mayo or Pierce or Bradley, any one of these three guys, they come in and they make a big splash. The linebackers really improve. Patrick Queen has his best year of his career or something like that next year. Then all of a sudden, Teryl Austin's contract runs out, and then one of those guys, if they've been doing a really good job, they might be your top guy looking to be your defensive coordinator moving forward. But those are the types of moves that I think the Steelers should be looking at. If the Rooneys really aren't going to expand the staff by adding a whole bunch of extra guys, which it appears that they're not going to be, they need to go after more senior position coaches to be filling the role so that they can help as extra coordinators sort of on the staff to give more oversight, help put together better game plans, and take the load off of some of the organization things, the tasks that go to the coordinators that have troubled the Steelers moving forward. So that's just a look. We'll see what has happened. Who knows? By the time you're watching this, one or all three of those coaches could be snatched up. The Steelers could be missing it, or the Steelers have hired someone else completely different, or they promoted Ryan Shazier or Vince Williams. I'm just giving you my perspective. I think those are the types of coaches, and they're not the only types of coaches. There's just three that I know of that I've been keeping my eye on. I've been saying, I wonder if the Steelers could get guys like those. We'll talk more about the Steelers coaching moves moving forward, but as I said before, we do have the Locked On Steelers mailbag, which is back open for the offseason. You can call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to get your question on the show. We got our first question we're going to answer right after this first break. And, of course, we've got our defensive line final grades on the season that we've been doing all year long. All that here next on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free. Share it with your network and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. If you add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, it will double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here on this Monday. Happy Black History Month to all those who celebrate. Let's take some questions here. Now, as I said before, during the season, we always tone down the call-in line because there's just so much to get to, and it's just impossible to do that and address your calls with what we're doing. But now that the season's over, we're slowing things down. We have more time to take your calls. We did have some people call in. Again, if you ever want to call to get your question on the show, the number is 412-223-6644. Again, leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you under the show. And we do have a few questions. The one I'm going to lead off with comes all the way from Texas. Take it away, Bruce.
Hey, Chris Carter. It's Bruce Stack from Fort Cavazos, Texas. I've been saying that Emeka Egbuka is probably my favorite target for the first round. Just the dude's motor, he blocks. He's the most well-rounded receiver, and the dude's a route technician to complement George Pickens. However, we also know the Steelers have several needs until we see what happens in free agency. And so if the Steelers are going to have a couple different pivots whenever their top guy gets picked, what order of picks do you think gives us the best value in the first 3 rounds? Like, what would be your ideal draft situation based on the depth and quality of players who are available? You know, would you go wide receiver, defensive tackle, cornerback with the first 3 picks? Maybe defensive tackle, corner, wide receiver in the third? Just wanted to hear what you thought. Thanks for what you do on the show. Have a good day, Chris.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate you calling in. As always, you can call like Bruce did, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Bruce, very good questions. And I'll tell you what, I haven't studied all the receivers, but I have started to dive into tape on guys, and there is a lot to love when it comes to Emeka Egbuka. Now, if you're not familiar with who Emeka Egbuka is, he was a top receiver for Ohio State. He set a lot of records for the school, 6'1", 205. He's going to come in with a lot of experience. He is a sharp route runner. He is a blocker. He is a guy who goes up and gets the football. He also seems like a very smart and heady player. Like, if you go back and you look at, I believe it was the national championship game, when it wasn't even a play that he was involved, when he helped draw up the play that Will Howard, when he threw it to Jeremiah Smith, when he caught the bomb at the end of the game. But he was the one that was like, hey, they're leaving this open. Let's go after this. He has a mind for the game. He wants to contribute, and he drew it up for a teammate. I think that Emeka Egbuka would be an awesome addition to the Steelers. And if they got him, he'd be immediately a guy that lines up across from George Pickens. The wide receiver 2 question would not be a question anymore. They'd have their 2 outside guys, and they'd be ready to roll. However, to Bruce's point, the Steelers have multiple needs, and that's where things get really tricky. So we talked with Nick Farabaugh and Alan Saunders last week about depth, about the Senior Bowl guys, and the Senior Bowl was played and all of that. There have been some guys that have improved their stocks, some guys whose stocks are still a little more in question. I think that there's certainly places where the Steelers could go that in the first 3 rounds that would kind of address their priorities. Now, in my book, there are 3 top priorities in this draft class because quarterback is just not a position that they should go after, and it seems like they're not going to either. But you got wide receiver, you've got defensive line, you've got cornerback. Those are 3 primary needs I think this team needs to address and could address with really good classes in this draft. Now, I think running back's another position they could address, but I think they should wait on it just because this is a deeper running back class, and I think that they can get a lot of these key needs early on in this draft class. So let's look at a few things. So if you're going in the first round, because as Bruce says, whenever you're drafting, you need to have multiple plans in place. But if you're going in the first round, you're looking at Emeka Egbuka. Maybe he is available at 21, but maybe he gets drafted before you. Other first round guys in my eyes who could fall to you got Luther Burden out of Missouri and Matthew Golden out of Texas. Those are between those 2 and Egbuka, those are the 3 guys that you're looking at there. However, I do think that if the Steelers waited until the second round, they would get some really good shots at guys who could be solid number 2 wide receivers, or maybe even develop into number 1 wide receivers. If they were able to to be in the right position for that. Some of those guys are guys that we've talked about on the show. The 2 TCU wide receivers, Jack Bech and Savion Williams, both of them over 6. Jack Bech is 6'2", Savion Williams is 6'5". So both outside type body guys that could get there. Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, a 6'4" receiver that plays on the outside. I think he's the guy to take a look at there. If they waited till later, maybe Trey Harris out of Ole Miss would be another option. He's 6'3". There's places to wait there. However, I think that the thing is that the Steelers, they're looking for a playmaker wide receiver who's going to contribute sooner rather than later. They don't want a project guy who they've got to wait on for quite some time. And the thing is that they've got their slot guys, right? Like Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, those guys can line up in the slot, can move around, be quick there, be fast there. If they're going for a receiver, they want an outside receiver type guy that can play the way that they can play on the outside, kind of like George does. They might not make ridiculous catches, but maybe they're a better separator. Maybe they can get separation and do things. Maybe they're another combat catch guy. Who knows? But I think that that's certainly part of the equation. But again, to Bruce's point, it's not just about wide receiver. It's about these other positions. And I do think it gets a little trickier to get the kind of player that you want that can contribute sooner rather than later if you start to wait on some of these other positions. For example, the Steelers, I think, really could use a true nose tackle, a mean space eater up the middle in the defense. And if they went in the first round, I think they'd have some multiple really good shots at it. Walter Nolan, who had a brilliant Senior Bowl week out of Ole Miss, he's a guy that could be there at 6'3", 305. But the guy that I've been talking about, a guy I continue to love his tape, Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, 6'3", 340. He's a guy that could do that. Tyleik Williams at Ohio State, 6'3", 327. Those are all first-round guys. But if they wanted to wait into the second round, I do think there'd be guys like that. There'd be Norman Lott out of Tennessee, who we've talked about, Derek Harmon out of Oregon, Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I think Deion Walker, I think his stock hit a little bit when people saw how high he rose up a lot of times when he attacked off the line of scrimmage, but still you get those chances there to address the position. So with that, I think defensive line is one of those positions that you might want to get in the first 2 rounds, especially because to me, the Steelers, they need a priority to find their future 1-2 punch in the defensive line. And they need it to be a priority that they not get bullied the way they did, especially down the stretch there, the way that they played against the Ravens. And part of that was their defensive line was getting blown off the ball. Keeanu Benton lining up at the nose was just not able to take on double teams and keep them from getting to the second level. He's more of a 3-tech. So put him in the 3-tech, go get a nose guard, a guy that lines up right over the center and just crushes people. That's what you need. And I think that's what they could get if they get a Kenneth Grant type of guy or a Walter Nolan type of guy for the defense up front. But again, corners also a need. Like, as much as we're going to talk about all the other needs in this team, I think that, I know there's some people out there that really believe in Corey Trice, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but at the same time, this is a guy who looked okay this year at times and was kind of getting beat at different times. And he's also had a serious injury history, and maybe he will figure it out. But you know what would be a great place to figure it out is if you had two highly picked guys like Joey Porter Jr. and a first or second round pick from this year, and then you have a Corey Trice, then you have a trio of guys that you could trust to play on the outside, play tough there. And that could be your young cornerback room that you grow to be a formidable force. And that consistently takes away guys. But again, you look at this draft class, love guys in the first round. Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame's a big name. He's coming off a hip injury though, so that's something to watch out for there. A lot of people are starting to wake up to Azareye'h Thomas, the cornerback out of Florida State. I've talked about him a lot. We talked about him a lot last week in the Senior Bowl. I expect him to jump way up the boards very soon. But then there's other guys like Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. I think there's guys there in the second round that if you waited a little bit, you could still get a guy there. But cornerback would also be a top need. But this is the tough part here, right? And it's the tough part every year. You can't get every position in the first round. You gotta be able to balance and see where the ones that you can strike first with. To me, I think the move might be going and getting a defensive tackle in the first round, getting a Kenneth Grant type guy, a guy that can just crush people up front, then getting your receiver in the second round, and then seeing about the third round if that's the right spot to go get your cornerback. And if it is, great, go get him. But I also think that if you're going to go invest a second round pick at wide receiver, that probably means you didn't you didn't go get someone big in free agency at wide receiver, so maybe you spent big somewhere else, and maybe that's somewhere else's cornerback, like getting Byron Murphy from the Minnesota Vikings. He's a free agent. I think that would be a really good get for the Steelers. But looking at how T. Higgins might not be able to even hit free agency if the Bengals just tag and trade him, the Steelers need to be prepared to go get a playmaker at the wide receiver position. And if they don't trade George Pickens, then that means that they need to find another number 2 there. And that means they don't need to sign probably a big vet there if they're able to go get a rookie in the second round who can be that guy that lines up on the outside. That's where I think the Steelers need to go receiver-wise. So if they're doing that, you probably want to get that in the first or the second round. To me, I think the right pace right now is D-line in the first, receiver in the second, and then see about cornerback in the third. And maybe you've invested in cornerback a little bit more in free agency, and that's how you go after it there. But all that being said, there's still plenty of time to look out. We will be starting mock drafts after the Super Bowl, not this week. We will be starting that because everyone always likes to participate in our mock draft Mondays. We'll get to those in a bit. But before we get into draft stuff, we got to get to our final grades. You've been watching and listening all season long with our stars and skulls. Finally had time to tally together a bunch of the grades. We start with the defensive line. What were the defensive lines group's final grades per player? We'll go over all that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you the show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, Prize Picks, it makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterback only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. What I love most, fast, safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play just a $5 lineup. That's right. Code LOCKEDONNFL. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. The show is also brought to you by Game Time. Looking for tickets to your next big event, maybe last-minute tickets to the big game next week. Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right tickets at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless tickets listings. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price, so no more sifting through thousands of options. The seat view feature is a game changer, but before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's so reassuring, and the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference of the price. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with our show today, and now it's time for us to get to the grades part of the show, where it's the final grades on the season. If you remember, all season long, for every single game, we graded players with stars or skulls or neutral grades. If you didn't do anything that really changed the game, but the stars were good, from good to elite play. Skulls were bad, from bad to terrible play. And it was just kind of just our way of keeping track of things, of who contributed to what wins and losses, and who was more plus than minus on the day. And so that's kind of where we kind of just build that out. So over the year, I do stack them up. I do kind of keep track of them and make sure that I'm not missing anything here. So let's start with the defensive line. And the defensive line, I'm starting with it because I do think, even with maybe the best player on the team this past season, not maybe, he is the best player on the team last season, this is the group I think that could use a boost the most right now, and we'll get into that, and we'll get into why there. But let's start with the top and the best of the best, and that is Cam Heyward, the highest grade on the team this year. Cam Heyward totaled 34 stars and just 2 skulls on the entire season. Of course, he never gets a bus ticket. He had that's great. That's good enough for an A+ grade. Now, for those who are wondering, the final letter grades is based off of the margin between stars and skulls and how many games you played. Cam, if I could add like 5 more pluses, and Cam Heyward would be getting it like that. This is the kind of grade that TJ Watt's been getting the past few years. So heck of a job by Cam Heyward. He's a Steeler. He's a Steeler for through and through. He's Mr. Steeler, represents the team, carries the flag. He's the heart and soul. You want that guy leading your team. And also, I think it's just remarkable that he was able to play this well all season long. Even after people were saying, "Oh, he's old, he's washed. Why are you giving him an extension?" He showed you why, and he earned it. But let's get into the other guys, because the defensive line as a whole was not great on the season. I think it was good at times, but we'll get into where I was talking about there. Let's go to the next guy that graded well, and that was Keanu Benton, second-year defensive lineman out of Wisconsin. On the year, I gave him 15 stars and 8 skulls. That's good enough for a B- grade. No bus tickets, of course. Keanu Benton was up and down at times this year, but I really felt like he was starting to grow into himself when he understood where he fit in the defense the best. His best grades came against the Jets when he got 2 stars. The Commanders, he had 2 stars. The Ravens, he had 2 stars, and then the final Browns game, he had 2 stars where he intercepted that screen pass. Keanu Benton's been a heck of a guy to watch. He also, I also gave him 2 stars in the second Bengals game. But he also has his inconsistencies. He gets blown off the ball. The Steelers have been trying to make him their nose tackle. He just hasn't shown that ability to anchor down when he gets double teamed, to stop them from getting him blocked into the second level. That's something that the Ravens did very well, and that's something the Steelers should move him away from. But overall, Keanu Benton, really good player, B-, and he has a long way to go to grow. And I think that if that next year could be a really big year for him if he continues to grow in the right direction and show the positive trajectory he's shown for most of his career. Now, on the flip side of that, you have an older player like Larry Ogunjobi, who did not have his best season. Didn't have a terrible season, but the problem is when you don't have a terrible season and you cost the money that Larry Ogunjobi does, it kind of reflects badly on you. You got 8 stars, 10 skulls. That's good enough for a C grade. If it was one more skull, you get into C- range, and then about a few more than that, then we start getting to crazier things. But when you look at Larry Ogunjobi, and it's just he's a $10.5 million cap hit next year. That's a lot of money to be justifying for average play. And it's not the first time that this has happened. I do think Larry Ogunjobi has done some really good things for the Steelers, but I think they got serious questions about how they're going to handle things, and his spot is one of the futures that I do put in major question for the roster, because cutting him saves you about $7 million. And frankly, again, when you're playing average on the season, it kind of makes it say like, okay, where else can I find that average or above average guy there? But let's talk about other guys who did worse than that, though. One in particular, Montravius Adams. Now, to be fair to Adams, he also missed a lot of time in this. In this season, he only played 12 games, but still 1 star. 7 skulls in the season. That's good enough for a D below average grade. And listen, Montravius Adams has done some good things over the years. He's filled in, but this was just too tall of a task, I think, this year to overcome with his injury. He has had some really rough games, especially down that losing stretch. And that's where I think that the Steelers could really use upgrades on the defensive line, guys that can just kill and eat space and take things over. Because if you get that guy to pair with Heyward and Benton, then you're cooking with gas there. But again, Montravius Adams, not a great grade. We'll see if he is allowed to hang around the team moving forward. Let's switch to another defensive lineman, one that people often forget was on the team, Dean Lowry, a guy that was a vet. I gave him 4 stars and 3 skulls in the season, good enough for a C. But Dean Lowry certainly was trying to make a difference at times, and there were times I think that he did, and he showed some moments. So kudos to him. But again, reserve defensive lineman. I think he wasn't going to be one of the game changers on the team, but it's important to have guys who can be those type of players on for your team moving forward, especially when you're trying to build the roster, and sometimes you just need really good role players. But let's move forward with another defensive lineman here, and it's actually the last of which of the group here, and that's Isaiah Loudermilk. Now, Isaiah Loudermilk on the season, 2 stars, only 3 skulls. Did play in games, but played sparingly in a lot of them. Isaiah Loudermilk was drafted, to be a guy who's going to fill out his frame and kind of be the same size as Cam Heyward. He's at least the same height as Cam Heyward. That hasn't exactly manifested, and I think that's why, again, the Steelers would be foolish to not try to address this defensive line very early in the draft with a really good draft pick, with a guy who's going to make a difference and going to make a splash. And try to get a guy who can sort of be that long-term partner for Keanu Benton. I think that that's certainly in the cards. And when you look at, again, the grades that you're getting at across the board with your depth defensive lineman, and even really your starting defensive lineman, what they don't strike fear. And I think that's what this team needs to be able to do with its defense, being physical, being dominant. We'll see how they address things moving forward. But thanks again for the people who called in and gave questions. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to have more position breakdowns and final grades throughout the season. Let me know if you agree with those grades or not. We could talk about who should have gotten more, who should have gotten less as far as stars and skulls. But ultimately, still, it's just I think there's a lot of opportunity there, especially with Cam Heyward sticking around, and especially with Keanu Benton being part of the future. If they get a nose, that can ease things up, and then you can get smaller defensive lineman free agent signings that kind of fill out the rest of your roster and see how that plays. But there's lots of options for the Steelers. They got to go after them, and especially in the coaching, as we said. Keep it here with the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll keep you up to date with all that information and how things are moving forward. Again, I'm your host, Christopher Carter. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of the social media, same handle all the time, at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here in the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow for more on your Steelers, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.